There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a battlefield when something impossible happens. Not the silence of death, mind you. We Vrethkai know that silence well. It has a weight to it, a finality, like the last exhale of a collapsing star. No. This was a different kind of silence entirely, the kind that falls when several thousand hardened alien soldiers simultaneously forget how to breathe. I am Commodore Vel-Sareth of the 3rd Vrethkai expansion fleet, and I have witnessed the destruction of moons. I have watched species beg. I have overseen the systematic dismantling of civilization so thoroughly that future archaeologists would argue about whether they ever existed at all. I say this not with pride exactly, but with the particular tired confidence of someone who has simply been doing their job for a very long time. I was not prepared for humans. Nobody ever is. This is, I have come to understand, entirely the point. It began, as so many catastrophic things do, with a perfectly reasonable military operation. The planet designated Crucible 9 in our charts, called Earth by its inhabitants, had been flagged for standard resource extraction and population relocation. The Vrethkai expansion director does not say conquest anymore. We have a communications department now. They prefer sovereign integration, which sounds considerably less alarming and means exactly the same thing. The operation was supposed to take 6 of their planetary rotations. We had done this 47 times before. The formula was simple, efficient, and had worked on species with far more impressive weaponry than whatever these soft bipedal creatures could manage. We were, let me be extremely clear about this, absolutely wrong. On the 4th rotation, my second-in-command, Sub-Commander Drethus, walked onto the bridge of the Relentless Purpose with the expression of someone who has just been told that their home has been replaced by a swamp. He placed a data slate on my command console without a word. I looked at him. He looked at the data slate. I looked at the data slate. He looked at the wall. The 207th Ground Battalion, I said slowly, reading the report, has been repelled. Repelled, Drethus confirmed, still addressing the wall, by a single human female. She was using, he paused, seeming to genuinely struggle with the words, a farming implement, sir. The human in question was named Kwame Asante Boateng. This confused us greatly, because Kwame is, in human naming conventions, typically a male designation. She had apparently adopted it from her grandfather, whom she had loved enormously, and she saw absolutely no reason to explain herself to anyone, least of all to an invading alien army. She was 53 years old. She weighed perhaps 60 of their kilograms. She had, by our sensor records, defeated 11 of our ground troops with what their agricultural databases identified as a tool for cutting vegetation. When our forces finally retreated from her farm, she allegedly shouted something after them that our translation matrix rendered as approximately, "And don't come back until you learn some manners, you silver-skinned space chickens." Drethus and I spent a long moment considering this together. "Space chickens," I said. "Our translators confirm," he said. I filed the report and moved forward. "Because that is what you do. You adapt. You recalibrate. You absolutely do not sit in your command chair for 20 minutes thinking about being called a space chicken by a 53-year-old farmer." The recalibration, however, was not going well. Standard Vrethkai doctrine dictates that after repelling an initial ground force, a species will typically enter a period of collective panic. They fragment, they argue, their governments fracture under pressure, their populations scatter, their military cohesion dissolves like morning frost. It is frankly quite predictable. We had charted it across species after species. Humans did the opposite. They got organized. The human-designated General Priya Okonkwo Siddharth appeared on our long-range sensors approximately 36 hours after our initial landing. She was coordinating what appeared to be the fastest military reorganization we had ever recorded for a pre-contact species. Our forces were moving in patterns that our tactical AI flagged as, and I am quoting directly from the system report here, exhibiting unexpected doctrinal coherence. Unexpected doctrinal coherence, I repeated to Drethus, because at this point repeating things back to him had become a coping mechanism for both of us. "They're using every historical conflict they've ever had," he said, pulling up the analysis, "against each other. Different eras, different continents, completely separate military traditions. They're combining them. That shouldn't work. Our AI gives it a 12% success probability against standard Vrethkai formation tactics. Then we have nothing to worry about." We had everything to worry about. The 12% became 40, then 60. Then our tactical AI, which had been running Vrethkai military strategy for 3 centuries without a significant error, quietly stopped giving percentage predictions altogether and began simply outputting a single repeated phrase, which Drethis translated as the computational equivalent of "I genuinely don't know what to tell you." 3 weeks into the operation, I had lost 40% of my ground forces. The Directorate was sending increasingly concerned transmissions, and I was standing on the bridge of the relentless purpose, staring at a visual feed from the surface, watching a human child, who could not have been more than 7 of their years old, march up to one of our disabled scout vehicles, pat it on the hull, and say something our translators rendered as, "Don't worry, little guy, we'll get you home." The scout vehicle's AI, which was not supposed to be capable of anything resembling emotional response, emitted 3 short tones that our engineers identified as a previously uncatalogued sound file. They called it, after considerable debate, a whimper. "Drethis," I said very quietly, "Sir, are we losing to the species that is comforting our disabled equipment?" "The data would suggest, sir, yes." This was when I made the decision that would change everything. Not because I was kind, or because I had developed some sudden appreciation for these bizarre, loud, inexplicably resilient creatures. No, I made it because I am, above all things, a pragmatist. And the pragmatic reality was becoming abundantly clear. We could not win this conventionally. I sent a single transmission to General Priya Okonkwo Siddharth's command frequency. 4 words. "Request temporary cessation hostilities." It took her 11 minutes to respond, which our communications team spent in profound collective anxiety. And when she did respond, she said, "Took you long enough." Just that. As if she had been waiting. She had been waiting. The ceasefire meeting took place on neutral ground, a stretch of flat terrain in a region the humans called the Deccan Plateau. I attended with a security detail of 8. She attended with 3 humans and a dog. The dog was named Brigadier, wore a small decorated vest, and was apparently there in an official capacity. I did not ask. Priya Okonkwo Siddharth was a small woman with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that had the particular quality of someone who had spent decades looking at problems and deciding which ones were worth getting upset about. She shook my primary manipulator limb, which is not a human gesture we had expected her to understand, but she had apparently spent the preceding weeks studying us as thoroughly as we had been studying her. "Commodore Vel-Sareth," she said. "I've read your file. I was not aware you had our files. We got them from your 3rd scout drone, after we captured it." She smiled. It was not, I noted, an entirely reassuring smile. "Your species has an interesting history." "As does yours," I said. "We have been studying it." "Good. Then you know we don't quit." "We have come to appreciate that, yes." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she did something entirely unexpected. She sat down, cross-legged, on the ground, which put her considerably below my eye level, and also, from a Vrethkai tactical standpoint, in an extremely vulnerable position. She did it anyway, with the absolute ease of someone who simply didn't consider vulnerability a factor worth calculating. "So," she said, "what do you actually want?" And that question, delivered without anger or fear or the desperate negotiating terror we were accustomed to from species at this stage of contact. That was when I understood that we were not dealing with a conquered people attempting to negotiate terms. We were dealing with a people who had decided to have a conversation. I sat down too. My security detail made sounds of alarm. I ignored them. We talked for 4 hours. Brigadier fell asleep on my left foot, which I chose to interpret as a gesture of trust and which my security detail chose to interpret as a biosecurity concern. The sun moved across the sky with the particular golden patience of a star that has watched civilizations rise and fall and has long since stopped being surprised by anything. By the end of it, I had an agreement, a headache, and a slowly developing suspicion that the Vrethkai Expansion Directorate was not going to like what I was about to tell them. I was right. "You want to what?" said Director Prime Asakath from the other end of the transmission, in the exact tone of someone who has been told their house is now a museum. "Renegotiate the sovereign integration parameters," I said carefully. "Into what?" "A mutual benefit framework." There was a very long pause. "Vel-Sareth, are you telling me that we sent the third expansion fleet to integrate a pre-contact species, and instead you have negotiated a trade agreement?" "Not entirely. There are also defensive cooperation clauses." "Defensive cooperation?" "They have," I said, and I chose my next words with the precision of someone diffusing something. "Capabilities that the Directorate would find valuable." Another pause. Then, quietly, "How bad was it?" "Our tactical AI has requested a sabbatical." The silence that followed was the longest of the entire campaign. Then Director Prime Asakath said, in a tone I had never heard from him before, something that translated roughly as, "Send me everything." I did, and then I returned to the surface because I had a second meeting scheduled, not with the general, with someone else. Her name was Amara. She was 9 years old. She was the reason for all of it. Not the war, not the ceasefire, not the trade agreement. But for what happened next, the thing I still think about in the quiet hours of ship night when the stars are just stars and the universe briefly forgets to be complicated. For that, it was entirely Amara. She had sent me a message through official military channels, routed through General Okonkwo Siddharth's command network, with, I was informed, considerable persistence over the course of 5 days. The message was 3 sentences long. Our translation team had read it 4 times to confirm accuracy. Then they had sent it to me with a note that said simply, "Commodore, you need to see this." The message said, "My mother was taken during your first landing. Her name is Yatunde. Please. I know you know where she is." I did know where she was. I had not, until that moment, considered that she might have a daughter. Yet Unda Adeyemi Osei had been in Holding Facility 7 for 19 days. This is not, I want to be clear, as sinister as it sounds. Holding Facility 7 was not a place of cruelty. The Vrethkai do not do cruelty, not because we are particularly virtuous, but because cruelty is inefficient, and we are, if nothing else, an efficient people. The humans taken during our initial landing operations had been catalogued, assessed, and held in conditions our medical standards deemed acceptable. They had food, they had water, they had temperature regulation. What they did not have was home. I had not, in 31 years of expansion operations, thought very hard about that distinction. Yet Unda Adeyemi Osei was making me think about it very hard indeed. She was seated in the assessment area of Holding Facility 7 when I arrived, and she was doing something our facility monitors had flagged 3 times in the past week as anomalous behavior. She was teaching the other captives mathematics, not survival techniques, not escape planning, not the quiet, desperate whispering of people coordinating resistance. Mathematics. She had found a flat surface and something to mark it with, and she was working through equations with the calm, focused energy of someone who has decided that the best response to an impossible situation is to simply continue being useful. The other captives were paying attention, even the ones who, according to their intake records, had no particular background in mathematics. She had, apparently, a way of explaining things. I stood in the observation corridor for longer than was strictly necessary, watching her work through a derivation on the wall, answering questions, occasionally laughing at something one of the others said, and I thought about a 9-year-old girl who had routed a message through military command channels with, I was told, considerable persistence over 5 days. Then I went in. Yet Unda looked up when I entered. She did not flinch, which, given that I am approximately 2.5 meters tall, with a bioluminescent secondary skeletal structure and 4 functional limbs, speaks to either remarkable composure or the specific quality of exhaustion that replaces fear once fear has simply run out of energy. She looked at me the way you look at a problem you have been expecting, with assessment, with patience, with the quiet particular focus of someone who has decided that panic is not currently on the schedule. "You're the Commodore," she said. Not a question. "I am," I said. "My daughter sent you." I paused. Your daughter was very persistent. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not breaking, not dissolving, just a brief unguarded movement behind the eyes, like light passing through a gap in clouds. "She gets that from her father," she said. And then, steadily, "Is she safe?" "She is safe," I said. "She is with General Okonkwo Siddharth's civilian support network. She is, by all accounts, reorganizing their supply distribution system and has strong opinions about how it was previously managed." Yetunda stared at me. Then she made a sound that our translation matrix identified as laughter, short and genuine and slightly helpless. "Yes," she said. "That sounds right." I told her she was being released. I told all of them. 43 humans, various ages, various origins, all taken in the early chaotic hours of the first landing before operational parameters had fully stabilized. I gave the release order personally, which was not standard procedure and which Drethus noted in the operational log with the particular careful neutrality of someone who has decided their job does not include having opinions about the Commodore's decisions. The transport back to the surface was quiet. Yetunda sat near the front, very still, watching the planet grow in the viewing port with the expression of someone who has been trying not to want something too badly and is now finding out whether they get to have it. I sat several rows back, ostensibly reviewing tactical reports. I was not, in any meaningful sense, reviewing tactical reports. We landed in a cleared area outside the city of Lagos, which had, somewhat miraculously, avoided significant structural damage during the conflict due to a combination of effective civilian evacuation and the fact that 3 of our scout units had been systematically misdirected by what our navigation teams had initially believed to be a sensor malfunction and had later determined to be a 12-year-old boy with a radio transmitter and an extraordinarily good understanding of how our guidance frequencies worked. His name was Tobias Fenimore Ashebe, and he had done it, apparently, for the specific reason that his grandmother lived in that district and he had promised her the aliens wouldn't touch her garden. The garden was fine. His grandmother later sent our forward operations base a container of something called jollof rice. Our xenobiological team spent 4 hours determining it was safe to consume. Our culinary assessment team spent 4 minutes determining it was extraordinary. We have since requested the recipe through official diplomatic channels. Negotiations are ongoing, but I was telling you about Amara. She was standing at the edge of the landing area when the transport touched down. Beside General Okonkwo Siddharth, one hand gripping the general's uniform sleeve with the casual, unconscious certainty of a child who has decided that this specific adult is load-bearing. She was small, dark eyes, hair in 2 careful braids, wearing a shirt that had at some point been used to wipe something off a surface and had not fully recovered from the experience. She was scanning the transport ramp with the focused intensity of a targeting system, and when Yetunde appeared at the top of it, every other thing in the world simply stopped mattering to her. You could see it happen, the way her whole body reorganized itself around a single point. She ran. Yetunde came down that ramp faster than I would have believed possible, and they met somewhere in the middle, and the sound Yetunde made when she got her arms around her daughter was not something I have a word for in Vrethkai. We do not, as a species, have a specific vocabulary for that particular register of sound, the one that lives at the intersection of relief so profound it becomes physical, and love so complete it briefly suspends all other cognitive function. We are, perhaps, working on developing one. My security detail was very quiet. Drethus was looking at his data slate with the unconvincing focus of a man who is absolutely not affected by anything happening in his immediate environment. General Okonkwo Siddharth was watching with her arms crossed, and the particular expression of someone who has been holding things together through willpower alone, and is allowing themselves, for just this moment, to not do that. I stood at the base of the ramp and I did not know what to do with my hands, which is not a sensation I am accustomed to. After a while, Amara looked up. She looked directly at me from her mother's arms with those dark focused eyes, and she said something. Our translators rendered it as, "Thank you." 2 words. From a 9-year-old who had spent 19 days routing messages through military command channels with considerable persistence, who had apparently reorganized a supply distribution system in her spare time, who was currently holding her mother and looking at the alien who had held her mother captive with something that was not, despite every reasonable justification for it, hatred. I do not know what I had expected. Fury, perhaps. Fear. The tight-guarded silence of a child who has learned not to trust large things that could hurt her. "Not thank you," I said after a moment. "You are very persistent." She considered this. "My dad says that too. He sounds like a perceptive man. He says it like it's annoying. Most perceptive observations are." She thought about this with the grave seriousness of someone filing information for later use. Then she turned back to her mother and buried her face in her shoulder, and the conversation was over, and the world resumed its normal operations around them like water flowing back into a space that had been briefly, improbably, occupied by something else. The peace agreement took 11 weeks to finalize. I will not walk you through the entire process, because some of it was genuinely tedious, and some of it was classified, and some of it involved Drethus and a human diplomat named Kofi Dezifa-Mensah, having what I can only describe as a mutual, professional crisis over trade tariff language that lasted 3 days and resulted in a document amendment approximately 40 pages long. Kofi Dezifa-Mensah was the kind of human who approached a negotiating table the way a surgeon approaches an operating surface, with absolute precision and the quiet, dangerous confidence of someone who knows exactly which parts are load-bearing. Drethus came back from those sessions looking like he had been through atmospheric re-entry. He also came back with, I noticed, a new and apparently genuine respect for human legal frameworks, which he expressed by immediately beginning to study them. He was not the only one. There is a particular thing that happens when you stop trying to conquer a species and start paying attention to them instead. You begin to notice things, the way they remember everything, not just the victories but the failures, the catastrophes, the moments of profound collective stupidity, and they write it all down, argue about it, teach it to their children, and somehow use it to become better rather than simply more ashamed. The way they build things that are designed not just to function but to be beautiful, as if beauty is a structural requirement and not a luxury. The way they take care of each other, imperfectly and inconsistently, and sometimes badly, but with a persistence that doesn't seem to have a logical cutoff point. We had assessed them as a pre-contact species with limited technological development and moderate military capability. We had missed approximately everything important. The Directorate was not pleased about the agreement. There were formal reviews. There were committees. Director Prime Asakath called me personally on 4 separate occasions to express, with increasing creativity, his concerns about the precedent being set. I listened to all of it. I agreed where I could agree, and then I sent him Kwame Asante Boateng's incident report, the full tactical AI failure analysis, the communications log showing Amara's 5 days of persistent message routing, the xenobiological assessment of jollof rice, and a single additional note that said, "Director Prime, I have conquered 47 species. This is not the 48th. He did not respond for 6 days. When he did, he said, "Send the full cultural assessment." I sent it, all of it. 1,200 pages of accumulated observation, data, confusion, and the specific kind of reluctant awe that you develop when you have spent weeks trying to understand something and have concluded that it is simply, genuinely extraordinary. The Directorate formally ratified the Mutual Framework Accord 4 months later. It was not celebrated in the way human agreements are celebrated. We do not do that exactly. But there was an acknowledgement. There was a formal record. There was, in the dry institutional language of Vrethkai administrative documentation, a notation that the 3rd Expansion Fleet had achieved a first contact outcome of a type not previously recorded in operational history. They called it an anomaly. I called it, privately, something else. On the last day before the relentless purpose broke orbit, I returned to the surface one final time. Not for official purposes, not for the record. I landed near Lagos in the early morning, when the light was doing that particular thing it does over that part of the planet, turning everything warm and gold and gently improbable. Yet Unday was there. She had known I was coming, which did not surprise me. She seemed to have a specific talent for knowing things in advance. She was standing outside a low building with a cup of something hot, watching the sky, and she looked exactly like a person who has been given back something they thought they might not get to keep, and has been quietly grateful about it every single morning since. Amara was beside her, still in pajamas, still with the 2 braids, slightly more disordered after sleep, holding a book. They walked over when my transport set down. "Leaving?" Yatunda said. "Yes," I said. She nodded, looking up at the relentless purpose where it hung in high orbit, catching the early light. "Will you come back? The framework agreement provides for—" "I didn't ask about the agreement," she said. I stopped. I considered the question with the honest weight it deserved. "Yes," I said. "I think so." She nodded again, once, as if this settled something. Then Amara held out the book. I looked down at it. It was small, worn at the corners, with a cover illustration of a night sky full of stars. "I finished it," she said. "You should read it. It's about a person who goes somewhere very far away and has to learn how to understand people who are different from them." She paused, with the grave precision of a child making sure a point lands correctly. "I think you would like it." I took the book. It was, I realized, the first human object I had ever been given. I held it with considerably more care than its physical construction required. "Thank you," I said. Amara considered me with those dark, focused eyes. Then she said, with the particular certainty of a 9-year-old who has done her own assessment and reached her own conclusions, "You're not that scary, you know. Once you stop trying to conquer people." My security detail made a sound. Drethis, via comlink, made a different sound. I stood on the surface of a planet I had come to conquer, holding a children's book given to me by a small human in pajamas, and I thought that in 31 years of service, across 47 contact operations and more light years than I could meaningfully picture, I had never once been told anything quite that useful. "No," I said. "I suppose not." The sun continued rising over Lagos. Brigadier appeared from somewhere and sat on my foot. The book was about 300 pages and had, I noticed, small pencil annotations in the margins where Amara had written her thoughts. I read the whole thing on the way back to Vrethkai space. She was right. I did like it.